Good morning, everyone. Welcome to BodhiBrew, offering advantage through insight. I'm your host, Confidi Kong, Creative Director of Bodhi Research Group. In today's episode, we cover the CIO Corner, Inside University Pension Plan's Investment Philosophy with the Chief Investment Officer of University Pension Plan Ontario, Aaron Bennett, and our CEO, Dr. Ranjan Baduri. Together, they will discuss how UPP is shaping a resilient and responsible investment future. Aaron Bennett has been the CIO of UPP for over 4 years. He brings over 16 years of investment experience with expertise in strategic asset allocation and responsible investment. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy a couple brew with us.
Welcome to BodhiBrew, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, Aaron.
My pleasure, Ranjan. Really appreciate the invite. Always happy to chat.
I am going to start with something that I think one day will be a Harvard business case, and it's something really remarkable. But University Pension Plan of Ontario was born during the crisis, during the pandemic, and even to start with, you were in action without a physical office, and many of the employees hadn't met each other in person even, so to start with. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the early days of University Pension Plan of Ontario and that difficult time during the pandemic, and some of the lessons that might have been learned from that could be applied even in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Absolutely. It was a fascinating time, and we really did come to be. We turned the lights on, so to speak, in July 2021. In fact, though, this had been something that had been in the works since the global financial crisis. And there was a recognition by the university sector early on that there was a need for scale to really provide greater stability and greater access to pensions overall within the university sector. So there are lots of conversations, and ultimately 3 universities, our 3 founding universities, University of Toronto, Queen's, and Guelph, decided to come together and merge their pension plans. And that's when we turned on the lights in July 2021 during the pandemic, as you said. A very difficult time for folks personally, and in some cases professionally. For us, it was a super engaging time. Lots of challenges for any organization. But when you think about starting up an organization during that kind of environment where there's so many things to do, people to hire, policies to establish, and infrastructure to create, but you couldn't get in a room and do it. We were very, very fortunate that we were able to focus on culture and people first, and we found a lot of the right people off the bat. And that really helped us come together as a team and get truly engaged and focus on the ambitious project that we'd set out in front of us. So culture first, and that's a challenge. And recognizing that it's a challenge when everyone is remote, I think is really important. I think the other elements are really things that you always think about when you're setting up a new investment organization or an investment services organization like ours. But they were really in sharper focus for us, is recognizing and taking risk intentionally was absolutely key. And we had to recognize all the risks that we were taking. We were taking on a significant portfolio, fully invested during a really volatile period in the markets. And understanding the risks that we were taking and how we could mitigate those risks to fulfill our purpose, which is to provide long-term sustainable funding for our members' pensions. And then we also had to think about another level down and deeper, and really thinking about things like liquidity and strategy and policy, because we wanted to be in that position where we could use our long-term investment philosophy, our long-term time horizon for investing, to find those opportunities amongst that that crazy era of volatility that was the pandemic, and that was really exciting and got a lot of people really engaged, and we were very fortunate to do that. And then the final piece was data and systems. We started with nothing, which on one hand is a little bit scary, but on the other hand is super exciting because we got to think of everything right off the bat. It wasn't, oh, do we move to the cloud? Do we not move to the cloud? It was, we're moving to the cloud. We're in the cloud. And that just opens up so many other opportunities and avenues to start thinking about, well, we know what others have done to be successful, but what are the right things that we can do in terms of systems, people, processes now? What are some of the leading edge elements that we can bring to bear along with the mid-size version of the Canadian pension model for the benefits of our members?
No, that is well said. And with regards to IT, you don't have to deal with legacy issues and so forth, right? Like, and you're able to some extent, cherry pick, and you and your team and your colleagues are able to cherry pick things that you know worked well or will work well, and things that you know don't work well or aren't working so well anymore. And yes, it's definitely challenging to have a blank canvas with regards to no IT and no systems on day one, but it gives a big advantage in some sense in terms of being able to select the best kind of technology and systems. I will also just state the people of UPP, yourself included, is it's a tremendous strength of the organization. Barbara has done a phenomenal job, and she's rightly won awards for this, and just I know professionally a lot of the people on in your organization, and I think that's been really well built and contributed a lot to the culture and the success of the leadership, yourself obviously very much included in that. Both of our fathers are professors, and so we both come from an academic environment, and so it really, I think, also gives an advantage in being able to totally understand, your constituents at the, the fiduciary duty that you have. And at the end of the cycle, for the pensioner collecting the pension, one of the things that is, really challenging potentially is if there's a lot of inflation, and so from a portfolio construction, top of the house perspective, what are your thoughts about inflation, and how are you sort of handling that inflation risk and so forth in terms of your decision making and portfolio construction?
It's a great question, because it goes back to one of your first questions when we were talking about the pandemic. Is you and I are old enough to remember when inflation was a real issue. Many aren't. And it hasn't been an issue for a long time. The pandemic reminded us that it can be, and as investors, it's an incredibly difficult environment to navigate, especially when growth is volatile in either direction as well. And there's very few tools as an investor that you can tap into reliably to really hedge all of that risk. Now, when we were setting up the pension plan, one of the key elements was the conditional inflation indexing for the benefits for the faculty and staff at universities. And as you said, that's incredibly important. People are living longer, so inflation matters even more. And when you've just gone through a period where all of a sudden your grocery bills have spiked up, and you're thinking about, how's this going to work when I'm on fixed income? That's something we're worried about too. So how do we think about this from a portfolio construction perspective? Now, the old tried and true method was buy a lot of real return bonds. In Canada, our federal government does not issue real return bonds anymore, so that's a little more challenging when there's no more primary issuance. You can certainly look at other options with regards to other government-issued inflation-linked bonds. Then you get into thinking about hedging the currency and inflation basis risk and elements like that, which you can deal with. But one of the key areas that we really like to think about is we want to focus on things that are going to help us with Canadian inflation. And we've tapped into some programs that help us replicate what we would have expected out of real return bonds in terms of that combination of real rates and inflation. we've also looked to other asset classes that have parts of these asset classes that can be inflation sensitive to help us with the inflation sensitivity of our liability. And that's when we start looking at things like real estate and infrastructure. And I don't think that's unusual. I think one of the learnings that we had, though, was that you really have to focus in terms of the areas that you're looking at in real estate and infrastructure, because the pass-through of inflation is not universal, is not uniform across all the different sub-asset classes of infrastructure and real estate. We started the program with very low allocations to real estate and inflation, and really wanted to ramp those up. And we did that intentionally, and we built a strategy that was focused specifically on areas where we saw really strong correlations and more direct pass-throughs in terms of the overall inflation that we could see in Canada. And as we build up those allocations further, we think that that'll really provide us an interesting mix between some solid returns that actually enhance our returns and provide us alpha, as well as some of that sensitivity offset to the inflation. So we can do a better job, we can have a higher probability and be more assured of meeting that promise to our pensioners that we are going to make every effort to really index these pension benefits to inflation so they can retire with a level of confidence that they've been asking for, that they've been saving for.
No, that's brilliant, and it's something that I think in general is underestimated by a lot of the community, just because they haven't lived through some of those times, and so forth. The one area which UPP has made a big mark almost immediately, just because of the way that it was constructed, and it goes also to Barb, is on responsible investing. And so if you could maybe comment on how the responsible investing is, really a part of the DNA of the entire plan. And also a corollary of that is that I know that your focus is on the fiduciary duty of getting these returns and risk-adjusted returns through the medium and long run, and meeting the requirements for your pension plan. But it's also a situation where some of the responsible investing goes beyond, obviously, any single pension plan, to try to make the world a better place and the environment safe and so forth. If there's wars going on and bombs going off and countries sort of pulling out of international treaties in a impetuous or abrupt way, how do you, sitting at the seat that you're in, how do you deal with those things? And does it frustrating that more groups aren't having that that vision, or causing damage to the environment, or does it also create opportunity, in terms of, you were at Ontario Teachers in the early days when they were a pioneer on the infrastructure. There'd be 2 or 3 groups bidding on something. Now there's 30 groups bidding on something. So maybe you could comment on this, and I threw a lot out at you there.
It's a big and complex and important question too, because I think we're being reminded now that just saying words like ESG and responsible investing isn't as meaningful, or it doesn't have the same meaning to everyone out there. And it is a tool. It is a method. It is a process that can be used in different ways by different people to achieve different goals. And I appreciate you linking it to fiduciary duty for us, because that's why we do it. Mm-hmm. And when we established our foundational investment beliefs as an organization, we spent a lot of time thinking about that and thinking about how we wanted to integrate that into our beliefs and highlight how we use this and how we connect this to our fiduciary duty. And I think we did a great job. It was recognizing that our investments have impacts on some of the systems, whether they're economic, social, or environmental, that we rely on to help us or support us in our ability to do our job, which is to get the returns necessary to provide those pensions at a sufficient cost to our members within their risk appetite. So that's a complicated thing to do. We need all the help that we can get there. And I think responsible investing is one of those really interesting tools that helps you get into some of the gray, fuzzier areas of investing and really find new and better ways to identify and manage risk and to identify and capture return. What you were also talking about was this idea that some of these issues in responsible investing, like climate change, are truly systemic issues. And in the classic investment sense, they're systemic issues. Is they're everywhere. You can't really efficiently hedge against them, and it requires system level change in order to manage them. So as an individual plan, much less a mid-sized pension plan in Canada, it's quite difficult to see how we would have an impact on things like that. So we think about having impact in those areas of systemic risk in a couple ways. One, we want to make sure that we have the ability to identify and monitor this risk in a way that allows us to manage it the best we can on our side, and also find opportunities that perhaps others aren't looking for. So you think about what's happening in the US with regards to renewable energy. Now, the easy thing to do would be to say is, I guess they're not going to do renewable energy anymore. Now, we know that to not be true, and the fact that we've got the ability and the relationships to tap into that and the expertise to evaluate those projects at a very granular and nuanced level and evaluate the commitments and the emissions profiles, that has allowed us to get into some areas where prior to the current environment, there would have been many bidders. Mm-hmm. Now, there's fewer bidders, and that provides us an opportunity to get better price, better terms, and unique opportunities for our members as well. So that's about the capturing the risk and return. Let's talk about the systemic risk. How do we manage some of those things? Well, we think that one element that we have increasingly started to focus on is really engaging with folks externally and really recognizing that governments need to hear what makes a good investment in these areas. What are we as pension funds worried about? What are some of the risks that we're trying to manage on behalf of our members? And we've learned over the years that you need to be at that table with governments. You need to be active, and you need to be there because if you're not, someone else is. And then the governments might not be getting the entire picture. So policy advocacy has become increasingly part of what we do and what we think is supportive of our investment program. And then the final piece is collaboration. So we're a mid-sized Canadian pension plan, and we can do some really interesting things. We've invested in certain areas that allow us to really punch above our weight in certain parts of responsible investing, risk management, and elements like that. We have this unique connection to universities as well, because that's where all our members come from. So we have access to some of the academic leaders in these fields. We look to collaborate with others to share some of this best practice, so we can all work on these things together in managing these systemic risks. We work with our external manager groups, we work with other partners, we work with other pension plans, and we share best practices between us because we recognize that as a small plan in the global context, we're not going to be able to achieve ambitious goals like net zero by ourselves. We're going to need others to help us there. And we're going to have to help others to get there as well. And the reason we're doing that is because that will allow us to manage the systemic risk down for the benefit of everyone. Because as you know, it's very hard to produce positive alpha and positive returns on a base of negative beta. And that's what we're trying to avoid in pure investment terms by managing some of these large systemic risks that can be presented by things that others might refer to as responsible investing.
Really, that's well articulated. And one of the things that your team does, your organization does, is for external funds, there's investment due diligence, there's operational due diligence, and there's responsible investing due diligence, and it's all three of those groups working together to come to a decision through the process with the investment committee and so forth. But that's one of the first, or if not the first, time that I've saw a pension plan integrating that. Like, back in the day, there was only investment due diligence. Ops DD didn't even exist. And, it came about in around 2004, 2005. I believe Ontario teachers invented that, and then obviously it caught on to be leading best practices. So on the responsible investing due diligence component of it, maybe you could give one or two examples how that has integrated in with regards to investment due diligence and operational due diligence.
Yeah, it's very much like my early experience with operational due diligence at teachers and working with that group there. They really did become a resource that external partners looked at as saying, okay, they're tough. They're going to ask us a lot of really hard questions. At the end of it, though, I'm going to have a package and I'm going to have learned some things that help me improve my own business and improve my ability to interact with some of the biggest and the best institutional investors out there. And that's what we're trying to achieve on the RI side of things. And we've seen that writ large, where we've engaged with global leaders in things like long-short equity strategies. And we've said, we really like what you do. We'd like you to do something like this that helps us with our net zero commitment, because we think that over the long term, that's going to increase our ability to provide long-term sustainable returns for our members' pensions. And this is a group that had been thinking about it, but hadn't been doing very much in the area. And ultimately they decided, okay, we can set up a bespoke program for you. Let's collaborate on this. Let's really think about how we want to do this. And the only reason we were able to create that program was because we had already established a lot of frameworks and taxonomy and methodology. We were open to the conversation. We weren't dogmatic about, well, you need to think exactly the same way we do. And we were very curious about, well, how would you think about some of these things? And would you be interested in partnering on something like that? So really thinking about them as partners. And I think that that's really key because not everything a partner does is going to work for us. And vice versa. And so it's finding that overlap and finding those areas of agreement where you can really build upon it. And RI has really helped us in a lot of ways. I think another example is even within the renewable energy space. Now, this is a complex space when you think about renewable energy development projects and infrastructure. Different rules, different demand profiles, different regulations, different sentiment across countries and technologies that can create a lot of risk. So when we were talking with a partner who's a global leader in renewable energy, we really wanted to think about how can we diversify some of these risks across a portfolio of co-investments. And RI played a big role in that as well. And that really helped us construct a portfolio that had specific investments in it, a little piece of specific investments across a wide range of countries and technologies and regulatory environments. And I think if we hadn't had the RI capacity and we hadn't done the RI due diligence with the partner in the first place, we wouldn't have the expertise or the credibility with that partner to really execute that. And I think that that's really helped us engage and collaborate with global leaders out there, and to support some of our smaller managers who do more niche things that say, I've only got 10 or 20 people here. I don't really know how to do responsible investing, but I'd love to learn. And that's music to our ears. We love to hear that. And we say, if you want to learn, we want to teach you. As I said, we're for and by the university sector. So that idea of teaching and learning is really ingrained in what we do.
It's very, very effective. And it just like there's operational alpha and structural alpha that emerged from operational due diligence. There is an alpha that is definitely coming from the responsible investing portion of this, as well as keeping it aligned with your overall investment philosophy. And maybe for the benefit of the audience, maybe I'll ask you to speak about the investment philosophy of University Pension Plan of Ontario, as well as then the follow-up question to that would be, you have so much experience in the capital markets, so maybe you can speak a little bit about give some nuggets of wisdom or some lessons that you've learned in effective portfolio management to be able to build a durable portfolio.
I'm glad you asked about investment philosophy, Ranjan, because it was one of those elements that we had the opportunity to really start fresh as an organization and to really think hard about. And we engaged with a number of groups, stakeholders, the board, the investment committee, senior investment professionals in the organization to really think hard about what is our investment philosophy. Now, there are the elements of our investment philosophy that I think everyone would be familiar with. It says, you're long-term, you're a pension fund. It's more than that, though. We're a long-term pension fund, and we want to be around forever. We want to be there for the university sector, and we want to provide long-term sustainable pensions for the faculty and staff of the university sector. So we really think about that when we make the investments as well. We also recognize that the investments that we make have impacts, both positive and negative, on the economic, the social, and environmental systems that we rely on in order to do our job, which is to produce those long-term returns. And so we have to be aware and think about those things as well. We also got a little more granular in some of these elements and really thought about risk and taking risk intentionally, monitoring that risk carefully, and always ensuring that we're getting paid for whatever incremental risk that we're taking with our members' assets. And that's really, really key, because the way a pension fund thinks about risk is different than a fund. We think about it in relation to our ability to fund the pensions. It's not just about beating the market. It's about doing what we need to do to provide that long-term sustainable funding. And then the final piece is this is a people business. There's lots of numbers. You and I are both from a quantitative background, and our fathers were quantitative about these things, and we recognize the value of that. Ultimately, though, this is a business where human judgment and human collaboration and all of those elements are really what makes it special and allows you to create that advantage for our members and provide those benefits of the mid-maple model, the benefits of scale.
Nice. No, that's excellent, and that's at the core investment beliefs, investment philosophy, because it all comes from that. From my end, I could go all day, and it's a real privilege and pleasure, but I don't want to trespass on your kindness, Aaron. But I will ask one final question. If you could give some advice to the young professionals or the students that are coming into our industry, maybe you could share some ideas there.
There's a couple pieces of advice that I give to everyone that's really thinking about getting into finance and this business. But I think it applies to anybody that's getting out there and graduating from university and looking at their first jobs. You need to find something that you're really, really passionate about and interested in. Not all elements are going to be interesting to you right off the bat. And you need to look for a couple things that are key to being successful in that first part of your career. And that's finding an area where you're just going to be in a position where you're just constantly learning about everything around you. And so that volume of work, the frequency of work, all those things matter really intensely at the start of your career, because that's going to help you make some choices later on. You're not going to like everything you do early on, but it's going to allow you to say, don't like that, do like that, I'm good at that, I can be better at this. And that's another element, is that continuous learning and improvement, and really think about, I don't have to be perfect right out of the box, but I got to get better. Yeah. And how do you get better on that? And then the final piece is take risk and take it intentionally. That's what investors do, but I think that's what everyone needs to do in their life. And there's never a more exciting time or perfect time for you to really think about taking risk, about going to that small firm or trying out this volunteer position and learning something new about yourself or the world. The time for that is right when you're graduating. It feels like you should be getting on this really structured path, and that might be the right thing for you, but it's not necessary. I think you can really think about, hey, what's the one area I'd really like to try? And when you're in school or just out of school, that's the time to do that, because that's when you can take that risk, and you got lots of time to recover if it doesn't work out.
Sure.
But you've also got lots of time to take advantage of that and build an incredible career out of it. And I think that that's something that's really helped me over the years. And when I look back and think about the journey to being the first CIO of UPP, I think that's really what served me well, and something that I'd hope for others to be able to experience.
Well, very well said, Aaron, and thank you so much for joining BodhiBrew, and thank you to the audience for listening.
Thank you, Ranjan.